You always hear about the companies that made it big, right? The massive valuations, the big IPO headline.
Yeah, the success stories.
Exactly. But what about the ones that didn't quite make it? Or the challenges, the pivots, those moments where, you know, it all nearly fell apart.
Mm.
What if the real lessons, the really transformative insights, actually come from understanding when things aren't just going perfectly up and to the right?
It's so easy to get caught up in those like highlight reels of success. But the real wisdom, like you said, it often hides in the setbacks.
Right.
It's really about learning what happens when it's not just smooth sailing.
And that's pretty much our mission today. We're doing a deep dive into that messy, often uncomfortable, but incredibly valuable world of challenges and failures in building and scaling companies.
Yeah, we're pulling out some key nuggets from founders, from leaders who've been through it, about embracing those setbacks, making the really tough calls.
And finding success by navigating the unexpected, not despite it.
Right. And the goal here is really to give you a shortcut to being well-informed, to offer some tactical wisdom that goes beyond just, high-level strategy.
This isn't just about what happened, but how it happened.
Exactly. So you can apply it directly to your own journey, whether you're building a company yourself or maybe just navigating your career.
Okay, so as we dug into these sources, one theme that kept popping up, and it feels a bit counterintuitive, was this idea of normalizing failure. Not celebrating it, but normalizing it.
Yeah, that definitely stood out.
It feels almost like the opposite of the always winning startup vibe, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And the uncomfortable truth is, well, it's always easier to criticize what's not going well than to actually propose solutions. Think about founders, right? It's their baby, the company. And I mean, nobody wants to hear their baby is ugly.
No, definitely not.
But that's the kind of tough truth you sometimes have to seek out. It's almost a mental shift you need to make, proactively going from that selling mode, like total certainty,
Right.
to being more of an objective observer when you talk to customers. It means choosing to hear the hard stuff, even when it, stings a bit.
And this isn't just for founders, is it? Our sources suggest this vulnerability, this willingness to share mistakes, it goes right to the core of being an effective leader. How does that actually help a team?
Well, when a leader says, hey, I messed up here, or maybe this is what I'm personally working on to get better, it builds a huge amount of trust.
Okay.
It's sort of subtly but powerfully signals to the whole team that it's actually safe to take risks, that it's okay to fail sometimes.
Think you can recover.
Exactly, because recovery and learning are not just like tolerated but expected, that psychological safety. That's the real engine of trust. And we know trust is basically the currency of getting things done.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, too, how this vulnerability can also kind of force accountability, like sharing the good, the bad, and the ugly in company updates or investor updates.
It makes it harder to hide things.
Right. It naturally forces you to look critically at yourself and makes it harder to just sweep problems under the rug.
That reminds me of something that often gets missed in business, unlike, say, sports. The idea of practice. An athlete practices maybe 90% of the time for that 10% performance. But at work, we often expect constant, perfect performance. Why is it so crucial to make space for practice, for making mistakes in a business context?
Because that's fundamentally where the real learning happens. It's where you iterate and improve. And when those mistakes or issues do come up, direct feedback is just essential. The longer you wait to address something, the harder it gets to fix. Being direct and emotionally honest when giving feedback, even if it feels tough, it actually gives people the momentum they need to improve.
Just that radical candor idea.
Exactly. Caring personally while challenging directly. And it's also important to recognize that burnout often isn't just about the hours worked. It's frequently tied to tasks that are just draining. So leaders need to be vulnerable enough to actually talk about and address those underlying issues too.
I hear you on the direct feedback. So thinking about the manager's role here, what kind of specific questions should they be asking to really encourage that openness, that candor?
Well, managers should consistently be asking things like, what can I do to help you? Or is there anything you'd like to ask me or maybe highlight?
Okay.
It shifts the dynamic from them jumping into fix-it mode immediately to actually listening with empathy. And one really specific tactic mentioned in the sources was implementing a super simple, low-effort grading rubric, something like check minus minus to check plus plus during monthly check-ins, like the company Choose did. It just normalizes having those potentially difficult conversations about performance, sets really clear expectations, and apparently it can even boost employee satisfaction because everyone knows where they stand.
That's a really practical nugget. And it leads us nicely into the next big theme, the strategic art of the pivot.
Ah, yes, the pivot.
This idea really resonated, probably because I've seen so many founders get kind of trapped by that persevere at all costs mindset. It's almost baked in, isn't it? This idea that quitting equals failure.
It absolutely is. The startup world tends to worship perseverance. But quitting, or maybe using softer terms like pivoting or iterating, that's an essential skill.
Right.
So many hugely successful companies, think Slack or Notion, they didn't start out doing what they do now. They found product market fit after a pretty big shift.
So how do you make that call? How do you decide rationally to walk away?
Well, one interesting approach comes from decision science expert Annie Duke. She suggests founders set really clear kill criteria.
Kill criteria.
Yeah, using states and dates. So, for example, if certain benchmarks aren't met by a specific date, the project or the whole strategy gets abandoned. Predefined rules.
That sounds incredibly logical. But, in the heat of the moment, when you've poured everything into this company, how realistic is it for founders to actually stick to those criteria?
That's the really profound part, I think. It's not about just giving up when things get tough. It's about fundamentally shifting how you make the decision, moving from emotional hope to objective, predefined rationality.
So you decide the exit conditions before you're emotional about it.
Exactly. It's like mastering the art of strategic retreat before your judgment gets clouded by emotion. Having that pre-planned exit ramp ready.
And we saw some great real-world examples of this. Take Janet Kurkuru's company, Binti.
Right. The adoption platform.
Yeah, they initially helped families navigate the adoption process, but their growth kind of stalled because they didn't actually control the government-run system underneath.
They were like guides for a process they couldn't change.
Precisely. So they made a really bold move. They pivoted hard. They started building tools directly for the child welfare agencies themselves.
Okay.
They basically embedded themselves with social workers, got constant feedback, and that led to huge product adoption and growth. It's a perfect example of pivoting the problem and the persona they were serving.
And then you have Alma. When the pandemic hit, only 5% of their therapists offered virtual care.
Wow, only 5%.
Yeah. They had to pivot to basically 100% virtual almost overnight, and they leveraged a newly launched insurance program to help make that happen.
So that was driven by external forces.
Totally. A direct product and promise pivot driven by necessity. Both Binti and Alma really show that intellectual honesty, being able to tell the difference between just noise and a real signal that something isn't working, is absolutely critical.
And it's not always just about the product itself, right? Sometimes the winning formula is in the business model or the go-to-market strategy.
That's a great point. Successful companies are often defined by those things just as much as unique tech. It underlines that pivots might need to happen beyond just tweaking the product. Knowing when to make that leap, even if it feels like quitting part of the original vision, that's real strategic thinking.
Absolutely.
So let's shift gears slightly and talk about a phase that often gets ignored. The messy middle.
Ah, the messy middle.
Yeah.
Sounds messy.
It often is. It's that period after you've found initial product market fit, but before you've hit significant scale. And it's maybe the most critical and weirdly the least discussed phase.
I can imagine. It's like the awkward teenage years for a company, maybe.
That's a good analogy. And just like teenagers change, the founder's role has to evolve dramatically during this time. It's not just more work, it's completely different kind of work.
How so?
Well, think about Drew Houston at Dropbox. He went from writing all the code himself in the early days
For a classic counter story.
to eventually not coding at all. His role shifted entirely to managing the organization, focusing on things like capital allocation, board relationships. That takes a totally different skill set, even a different risk appetite compared to just, making visible progress coding something yourself.
And what worked in the early days, that scrappiness, making decisions on the fly, maybe executives having quick chats in the hallway, that can become a problem later.
Oh, absolutely. That early stage scrappiness can quickly morph into toxicity when you hit, say, 30 to 150 people.
Toxicity. How?
It leads to infighting. Lack of transparency. Because decisions are being made in silos without clear communication or process. Suddenly, you need clear processes for organizational efficiency, even if it feels slow compared to the early days.
Because without clear roles and responsibilities,
Things fall through the cracks,
uh-huh.
or issues escalate way more than they should.
And then if you hit hypergrowth, that just pours fuel on the fire, right?
Mhm.
Companies like Coinbase going from 20 to 300 engineers really fast.
Whoa.
They found they had to completely rebuild their hiring processes, their org structures, just to keep their heads above water.
That's right. The ability to just react and adapt during that intense phase, even if it means promoting leaders who maybe aren't the perfect long-term fit, but can handle the immediate chaos, that's crucial. Otherwise, you get pulled down by the undertow of that growth.
And what are the warning signs? How do you know you're stuck in that messy middle?
A really common symptom is when, say, a 60-person company suddenly feels like it's moving at the speed of a giant corporation. Projects take forever, they balloon in scope, features get shipped that nobody actually asked for or wanted.
Oof,
That's a huge red flag. It signals a clear need to tackle those internal inefficiencies and get focused again before everything grinds to a halt.
Which brings us neatly to our fourth theme,
Mm.
tempering that founder optimism with a dose of reality.
Yes, the optimism paradox.
Founders are almost definitionally optimistic, right? You kind of have to be to even start a company.
Absolutely.
But that optimism, while it's critical fuel, it needs to be balanced. Have to challenge your own biases, especially that really pervasive one, I know I can turn this around.
It's vital. And one way to do that is using techniques like future casting, asking yourself, what specifically needs to happen in the next month or two? What benchmarks absolutely have to be hit?
Right, making it concrete.
And over-optimism can also lead founders to just commit to way too many projects at once, spreading themselves too thin.
Trying to do everything.
Yeah. It's usually much more effective to choose projects really carefully, commit 100% to fewer things, and actually learn from each one before jumping to the next big idea, focusing on outputs, not just inputs.
What do you mean by that? Outputs versus inputs?
Like, can you clearly describe how any given activity directly contributes to your company's OKRs, those objectives and key results, the measurable goals? Can you do it in 2 sentences or less?
Okay.
If not, maybe that's something you skip or at least deprioritize.
And this ties right into fundraising pitfalls, too. Why do founders so often underestimate the risk of a busted financing? Raising too early or asking for too much without a clear plan for the cash?
It can seriously damage your credibility with investors. A lot of funding rounds fall apart because founders just overestimate their position. Or, as one source pointed out, they kind of play games with their metrics.
Like how?
Like maybe lumping paid customer acquisition and organic acquisition into one number without clearly showing the difference or the cost. Things like that.
Got it.
The smarter approach often is just being really open about what you haven't figured out yet rather than trying to spin everything perfectly. And this also relates to the power of saying no.
Right. As the company gets bigger, the CEO especially just gets bombarded with requests.
Constantly. Learning to say no effectively, drawing really firm boundaries, it becomes crucial to avoid death by paper cuts.
Death by paper cuts. I like that.
One source actually highlighted that something like 70% of a CEO's time can easily get sucked up suboptimally by just emails and meetings.
70%. Wow.
Yeah, it's a massive drain. So setting those boundaries, maybe even negotiating a work from home day with 0 calls, like one leader did, becomes essential just to carve out time for strategic thinking and, frankly, to prevent burnout.
Makes total sense. Okay, finally, let's talk about the impact of tactical details. The reality check.
Yeah, the specifics.
You know, going through all these sources, it really struck me that the advice that seems to resonate most deeply often gets into those oddly specific yet perfectly helpful tactical details. It goes beyond just the high level what you should do. Why do those specifics hit home so much?
I think it's because they give you something concrete, something actionable you can actually do. And this often starts with just foundational knowledge.
Like the basics.
Exactly. Understanding the real nuts and bolts of a problem, like knowing how to set up a stable development environment or how to write good pull requests, which, for anyone less familiar, are basically formal proposals for changing software code. That stuff is incredibly powerful, especially if you're new to a field.
It's about not skipping the fundamentals.
Right. And addressing technical debt. You know, all those little shortcuts or messy bits of code that pile up and eventually slow you down. Addressing that when it actually starts impacting customers rather than just chasing the newest shiny tech trend or saying, I'll fix it later.
Yeah, later often never comes.
Exactly. Investing a little extra time up front to get the right tools and processes in place can literally save you months of headaches down the road.
And that connects back to choosing the right tools at the right moment. It's a very specific tactical call, isn't it? Not just grabbing the fanciest new thing.
Precisely. Like maybe using basic Google Analytics for visitor data in the super early days before you really need complex tools like Amplitude or Mixpanel. You only bring those in after you've found product market fit and need deeper insights. It's about matching the tool to your current need.
Got it. And we can't forget those specific managerial tactics we touched on earlier.
Right. Beyond just asking those good probing questions, what other specific tactics came up for fostering that healthy, feedback-rich culture?
Well, that simple grading rubric we mentioned, the Shet2++ thing from Choose during monthly check-ins, that seemed really potent for normalizing tricky conversations and setting clear expectations. It gives people a clear framework for improvement.
Okay. And shifting to sales for a moment. The sources really emphasize sustainable scaling,
How so?
using things like metrics calculators to really understand your customer acquisition cost, SIOF, your customer lifetime value, CLV, and crucially, your payback periods before you go on a big sales hiring spree.
To avoid having to do painful layoffs later if the math doesn't work.
Exactly. And also realizing that your inbound lead volume doesn't just magically increase because you hired more salespeople.
Right. Someone has to generate those leads.
Yeah, marketing needs to commit to delivering more leads. Otherwise, like you said, you've just hired people to sit around waiting for the phone to ring. A crucial reality check.
Definitely.
And then there's hiring itself, especially those early employees. Hiring with real intent.
What does that mean in practice?
Well, instead of just trying hard to convince top candidates to join your risky startup, maybe interview by actively trying to convince them not to join.
Really? Try to talk them out of it.
Sort of. The idea is to really find those people who have a true founder's mentality. Humility, grit, passion, maybe even some financial runway themselves.
Right.
People who are making the right decision for them, not just getting swept up in your vision.
So you filter for resilience and realism.
Exactly. It's about finding people who are wired to test theories, to debate ideas constructively, not just those who want to copy what worked at their last big company or look good on a press release.
And things like transparency around salary ranges can help here too.
Yeah, that can be a powerful recruiting tool and also just reinforces a culture of openness and fairness right from the start.
Wow. Okay. What a deep dive this has been. We've really covered a lot of ground, from embracing vulnerability and normalizing failure,
To having the guts to pivot when the data says you should.
navigating that really complex, messy middle stage of growth,
Tempering that essential founder optimism with a solid dose of realism.
and finally, really focusing on those practical, tactical details that often make all the difference.
It seems clear that success isn't really about avoiding failure at all costs. It's much more about mastering the art of learning from it, adapting to just constantly iterating.
So as you listening reflect on all this, maybe think about a challenge you're facing right now in your own work or your career path. Is it a problem you've just been persevering through, maybe out of habit, or even because you're afraid of what quitting might look like? What kind of kill criteria could you maybe set for it to help you make a more rational decision down the line? And thinking about those specifics, what oddly specific yet perfectly helpful tactical detail might actually unlock a breakthrough for you if you were willing to truly normalize the possibility of failure and actively seek out those hard truths?